Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Hayes Interviews. Today, we are very happy and delighted and excited to be talking to Teresa Coraggio about her book, How to Dismantle an Empire. And it's just occurred to me that I might have mispronounced your name. So, did I get that right?
You got that so right. I love the way you pronounce my name.
Good. I think I must have heard other people pronounce it, and but just as I said it, I thought, oops, I didn't check with her before we hit record. So, thank you for being here. How are you doing?
I'm doing so well, and I am so happy to be talking with you, Nick.
Well, I'm very glad that we're doing it as well. We were just saying before we hit record, this interview's been a year in the making. It came off the back of a comment you left on another interview I did that became an email, and then we'll do it, and then sorry, I'm too busy. And then it just took so long for me to get my ducks in a row and actually get the book read. But here we are. We made it. I've read the book. I'll show everybody. I've marked it up with many, many little sticky notes there in the edges. And
And
so we did it.
Nick, this has been an entire lifetime in the making because it is the lifetime of William, your son. Because you say this as, oh, I just didn't get around to it. You have been busy because you had William about a month after we first connected.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So I was just looking in the emails. The first email I sent was the 22nd of May, 2025. And then yes, my son was born a month later. And boom, that's it. That's one life ends and another begins. Three more begin, because I can't
Yes,
even
yes,
remember who I was before I was William's dad. It's so
yes.
strange and alien to me that time of my life now. But back then, in that previous life, I did have more time for interviews and reading and working on the channel and content. These days, it's a little trickier, but yes, we're here. We made it. So what happened is I started the book and then I got about four chapters in, and then it got left to one side, and I couldn't get back to it. So every time I went back, I restarted it because I was like, I want to make sure, I'm refreshed. And then recently I got put on a new job, which requires a new day job, which requires quite a commute. And I've been doing this commute via train, and this has afforded me lots of reading time 3 days a week. And so I don't like having to do the commute, but I do like having all this extra reading time where I have nothing better to do. So that is how I've been able to finally get it read and get to the end, and feel comfortable enough to set up this interview to talk to you about this wonderful book. So this is How to Dismantle an Empire, and it was published 2021, and it's quite prescient. I was just going through some of my notes here, and there's a bit here where you talk about um, how Iran was doing an end run on the dollar on page
Yes.
131. And I was like, well, isn't
Mhm.
that prescient and interesting given where we're at now here in 2026? But before we get into the minutiae and the details and the quotes and the concepts, tell us about the book. How did it come to be? Take as long as you want to give us an overview, and just introduce it to people.
Yes. Well, how it came to be was that I had a radio show, which I also called Third Paradigm, and that's my Substack, my YouTube, my Rumble channel. And in that, I kept trying to explain how we could do money in a different way. And I found that people just weren't getting it. There was too much history, there was too much that I needed to explain to be able to engage them. And so the book that I thought that I was going to write was called A 2020 Vision: The Economics of Community. But what
Mhm.
I found is that before people can understand the solution, they need to really understand what the problem is, and that people weren't getting that. They weren't really seeing why it is that we can't do things on a case by case individual basis. There's not a way that you and I can make decisions and say, okay, we're going to live right. We're going to do this and we're going to succeed. And we can't do that at a community level. That what we need is system change. And so that's when I decided to go back and write How to Dismantle an Empire.
Right. Yeah, and that's actually right at the beginning. Page it would be 11. I'm reading the Roman numerals, XI. So this is the preface. And this part I marked as your thesis, and I'll just read it out. And you wrote, the gist of my argument is that we, citizens of the first world, unwittingly collaborate in the enslavement of others through our taxes, our rents, mortgages, our jobs, our insurances, our educations, and especially through money itself. In order for our labor to serve the market, which is a euphemism for investor profits, other people's labor needs to serve us. They they need to grow and process our food, make our clothes and goods, mine our oil and minerals at the expense of their environments, health, and safety. And I thought it's great to have had that thesis right up front to frame all the data and information that follows. Because one of the things you said before we hit record, and I'm glad you said it, was that it's not an easy book to get through. Like it's well written, it's easy to read, but it's dense. There's no wasted anything in this book. It's like footnotes and history, years, dates, names, people, organizations, words, definitions, questions. Like there's so much in it for, a relatively slender book, 300 and something, 60, 70 pages or so. It's big in terms of ideas and concepts and everything. You got a lot in there.
Yes, it really is six books in one. And
Right.
how I organized it was, and I didn't actually realize this until I started recording it on my Substack and said, "Oh, there actually is a way that this flows, is that it goes from the past to the present to the future in six sections." So it starts with the ancient past. It starts with how money was created and how money was designed to be doing exactly what it's doing today, that's not an accident. As our mutual friend James Corbett was just saying, how it works is how it was designed to work. That's not an aberration. And then the second section goes into colonial history and looks at two ways to make a slave. I say that one is to take a people away from their land, but the more efficient way is to take the land away from the people, because then you always have a new crop of people to make into your slaves, and you get the resources just as a bonus. And then I go to the present. And in the present, I start with World on Fire. And fire is capitalized the way that Michael Hudson uses it for finance, insurance, real estate. And those are the non productive ways in which money is made out of money, where it is just ownership and we are all paying rent in that sense. And that goes through the global ways in which this has been used. And as you mentioned, I talk about Iran in the context of Libya, because that was what was happening at that time. And then I go into how in the United States, here in the belly of the beast, this has been usurped. And I look at Detroit as it takes a pillage and all the things, the different instruments that they use in order to make sure that we cannot escape. And then I go into the future with one land of milk and money, where I reimagine money and say, what is it that you would want money to do? And then look at completely changing the paradigm of what money is to figure out what we would want. And in the last section, I look at how this could be used in the future and the three steps that we could use in order to take back our sovereignty if we have system change.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's such a good overview. So, and I'm glad you used the word paradigm as well, because one of my favorite things about the book is that at the end of important sections, you get these paradigm shifts. And I like the way you invite the reader to, you're not sort of telling us this is the way it is, right? It's unusual. The book's unusual in a lot of books, they'll have a flow, a narrative, a thesis, an argument, a central point. Here's the evidence. Here's why I think what I think. Here's the conclusion. And you're supposed to sort of read it, download the information, and walk away. You're kind of saying, try this on. experiment a little bit. You don't have to use my words exactly, but think about the concept, right, that I'm communicating. Maybe you've got a better word you could use, and you're really inviting people to participate in the reading process. And then you take on such a gargantuan topic that is so important to everybody. So I admire just the work and the effort and the scope and the vision behind it. And so that structure, it makes perfect sense. And I wanted to focus on early in this talk about some of that ancient history stuff because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about money and its origin and what people did before money and where it came from. So, in researching the book, what were some of those misconceptions that maybe you overcame for yourself, or that you come up against in other people when you're talking about these things about money, where it came from, and how what did we ever do before money? You know.
Yes, yes. And so I look at a big influence of mine was David Graeber and his book, Debt the First 5,000 Years. One of the things he says is that money was never designed as a unit of trade. And we can look at our lives today and see that there is no trade with the people who are making our goods, especially in foreign countries. And so he looked at how money was designed in conjunction with taxation in order to organize labor for the purposes of conquest. That what happened is that the treasure that had been stolen before got turned into units that were stamped with the sovereign's mark and given a value greater. And then everyone who was citizens of that realm had to then get collect taxes for that, which meant that they had to provide labor, no matter what it was, to the soldiers, because the soldiers were the ones who were given those coins. So it meant that everyone, no matter what they did, was collaborating in the act of conquering their neighbors. And if they didn't cooperate with that, they became the lowest of the slaves. They were sent into the mines, they lost everything. So the communities, especially that revolted against that, became the example.
The thing that I really appreciated and that I've heard elsewhere, particularly Alan Watts talk about, is how the money system is part and parcel with the military system because unless you have those fancy little coins to give to the soldiers, they're not going to do any soldiering for you, right? Because
Right,
they're just going to be more
right.
focused on where's my food coming from, making friends with the farmer,
Mm-hmm.
and doing that local thing. But suddenly, once you have these little tradable tokens, and now you can pay the army, and now you can force the people who are conquered to also use it, and then the cycle begins, right? So you've got the
Yes,
money, the trade, the commerce, and the military. It's really all just one system,
yes,
kind of that comes as a package, right?
yes. And it went hand in glove with democracy, something that we think of as, oh, this is so advanced. This is wonderful. We own our government. No, what democracy was a way of taking those who had the land, who owned the land, and therefore had everyone else working for them and giving them stepping stones so
Mm,
that they could move up in the hierarchy. And in the meantime, you had things like primogeniture, which meant that only the oldest son could inherit. And that meant that the next sons would then have to go off and make their fortune as soldiers because they needed to pay the taxes on the family land. So it kept this going in a way that goes back to ancient Greece, and particularly the mercenary soldier, who was what all the other lord fiefdoms coveted. So
mm.
that kept this system going with the pretense that it was actually participation, but it wasn't really a choice at all.
Yeah, and that's a good time. Actually, I want to mention some of the definitions, right? And I actually wrote down one of the words you just used, which is a familiar word, but the problem with words is, and when we talk to people, is we often think we're using the same word, and we are. We're making the same sound with our mouth, but
Mhm.
we don't often stop to check that the other person's concept of the word we're using is the same as ours. So when I say the word democracy, and someone I'm talking to, a colleague, might say the word democracy, we could be talking about two completely different things, but we don't realize because we don't say, okay, before we continue, let's define the term that we're using. And that's one thing you do all the way through the book is you're giving us, here's a term and here's either a new way to think about it, or you give us your way of describing and explaining it. And for democracy, there's a longer definition, but the bit that I picked out was you wrote, it's a pretty word laid over systemic violence. And that's amazing. It's so well said, so concisely put. And like you say, most people think we're at the cutting edge of political
Yes.
systems, and we've never had a system as good as this one. Not realizing that it goes way back. It's very, very old. It goes back to ancient Greece. And it was used then for the purposes of what you just described, kind of adding that extra layer between the masters and the slaves, so that now there's the opportunity to move. You know, you might be able to get up a little bit, or you might go down, right? Which keeps people in line. It's always good to have
Mhm.
like, oh, I don't want to end up like them. So I better keep paying my taxes and slaving away and doing what I'm doing. But the other word you put in early in the book, this is page 6, you mentioned capitocracy, and you describe how this makes people a little more master, a little less slave. And that hits on one of the key themes of the book and one of the key, I think, paradigm shifts as well of helping people understand this sort of thing is that duality that we've all been sort of forced into by being born into these systems that existed long before we came along. That it is schizophrenic in a way,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
and that we're not, and that's on some level, certainly those of us who are not conscious of it, it's still going to have a deep down subconscious impact on our behavior, on our sense of self-worth, on the way we live our lives, because it's such a impossible tension to resolve. The fact that we are so wealthy and we live in all this abundance, but it's dependent upon real misery and slavery in other places, but we never go there and we don't see those people. So, you know, it's kind of we can kind of ignore it a little bit, but it's still
Yeah.
it's getting us on a soul level, on a deep level, I think, whether we are conscious of it or not. So, yeah, that's not really a question, but can you speak a little bit to that
Mhm.
duality of being part
Yes.
master, part slave, and how it affects people, where it comes from?
I'm so glad that you picked up on that because I think that's of everything, one of the most important elements is that we have this cognitive dissonance because we can't really see what's going on. Because if we see what's going on, we have to admit to ourselves that we're not really the good people that we think we are. We are participating in all of this. And that's how the system captures us. That's why it was so clever to make it so that we have to participate in order to pay our own taxes, so that we have to be good people to our own families to be able to support them and protect them. But at the same time, we're doing that by being participating in terrible things that are being done to other people. And there is no way out of that. That's where there was a reading I went to of a historian last night who was talking about the Dutch East India Company
Hmm.
and how that was the first time that corporate shares were distributed. That concept of buying in to a corporation and having a share of the risk, having a share of the profit. But what you really have is a share of the moral culpability.
Hmm.
So that in my book, I talk about the slave ships at Nantes, and how everyone had a share in that. And so that in the French Revolution, when the question came up of, well, should we free the slaves of Haiti? Everyone said, well, no, because that's what my fortune depends on. I already have an investment in these slave ships. So I think we've all been captured in that way. And that a big part of being able to be effective, I think, is being able to get over that guilt and say, I did not create this system. This is not me who's doing this when it's my government. This is something that I've been born into this time and place so that I can see what's really happening.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm sure it's not just me. I'm sure there'll be people listening who are so glad to hear you say that about the guilt, because the guilt that can be really heavy for people. I mean, I was brought up Catholic as well, so there's an extra bit of guilt thrown in there. But the guilt is fed to us by the corporations and the governments and the people in charge, because it's like, oh well, you have to clean out your yogurt pots and recycle them, and you can't drive because it's destroying the planet, and you shouldn't eat meat because that's bad for the environment, and it's all like problems created by the shareholders and the capitalists and the big businessmen and the bankers, whatever you want to call them. Problems created by this, I call, the parasitic kind of elite or whatever. I don't know. People have different preferences and different words, but they cause the problems, and then they saddle us with the guilt. And then
Yes.
we're all going through life feeling bad and feeling terrible. And like you say, it makes you ineffective. You
Mhm.
become sort of, it's just heavy, and then and you
Right.
need to take on and survive and thrive in these kind of systems. You need to have some optimism, you need to have some spark, some joy, and you say that right up front in the book, don't you? You're saying like, look,
Yes.
this is pretty heavy going, make sure you take some time to dance and sing and relax and eat good food and spend time with the people you love. That is right at the beginning. I just remembered that. So the good advice. But yeah, the guilt is heavy because we've all been made accomplices to this crime. We're not we didn't plan it, we didn't perpetrate it, but by virtue of the time, the place in which we were born, and just the fact that there's such a campaign of full spectrum dominance on people's ability to become aware of this reality to the systems, so much propaganda, so much schooling and conditioning, that it's very hard to break through that. And then when you do, it can seem so heavy and hard and overwhelming. So,
Mhm.
um,
And Nick, you talked about another thing that I think is so important, which is the words. And the fact that the words have been usurped and in
mhm.
many cases made to mean their opposite is not an accident. That in this book, I go back 3,500 years to the origin of money. But the book that I'm writing right now is called Oh My Goddess. And
Okay,
it goes,
nice. Good title. Oh, that's just, well, just I'll mention there is so much fantastic wordplay throughout the book. You've got a real talent and a knack for that. The little titles, the section titles, and I love that stuff. The word plays, and yeah. So that's no surprise at all. You got such a snappy title for the next book.
I'm glad you appreciate that. The material is so dense, as you say, that I had to figure out ways to lighten it up. And so in Oh My Goddess, I'm going back 5,000 years and more to look at what was there before patriarchy.
Mm,
And what I find is that our languages, all the religions and all the languages, have been designed in order to trick us, in
mm,
order to make it so that we can't think clearly about concepts, because whenever we use the words, we're using words that are hex tricks, that are magic, that
mhm,
are this form of tricking our tongue into saying the opposite of what we really mean. So, for instance, if we look at the word sovereignty, sovereignty, I joke, is my middle name because it is the most important concept, the idea that we are all capable of self rule.
mhm,
But you look at sovereign wealth funds, and that's exactly the opposite. Or you say, oh, and this is the sovereign, meaning this is the king. So we can't talk, there's no good words to describe what it is that we want for ourselves and for everyone else so that we can be taking responsibility for our own lives and those around us.
Yeah. Yes. And so that's why the definitions are important and challenging people's common assumptions, really. A lot of people just assume, don't they? They know what you're talking about when you say these words. And that's what it's based on. It's based on it's successful because people are not picky and they're not saying, wait, 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 before, what do you mean by that exactly? You know, and I've been called pedantic and I've been called preachy. Usually after a few beers when I'm down the pub and I'm holding and I'm like, whoa, before tell me exact define that word for me before we continue. And it's like, oh, you know what I mean. It's like, no, but maybe I don't. So
Yeah.
but not everyone likes that. It's a challenge. It can be quite
Mhm.
confrontational and it gets people's backs up, especially if they don't have a good answer. And sometimes,
Mhm.
though, you do that and they go, yeah, actually, I'm not sure how to define that. You know,
Right.
I think I know what it is, but I can't
Yeah.
actually give you a definition of it. So
Yeah.
there's work to be done in reclaiming the language and the words as well, isn't there?
Mhm. And something that I do very much on my Substack is I have one episode called Have a Better Argument. And what I mean by that isn't win, it's make sure your arguments are actually going somewhere. And you start by liking the person that you're arguing with, and then stating the question clearly, and then defining all the terms in the question. Because often you can find out that really you agree, and it's just that you're using different words for the same thing.
I'm just laughing because I'm reminded again of sometimes, again, down the pub, few beers, when I've got into an argument with someone and we've had that realization at some point that we were actually in agreement. And I'm like, and we're exasperated. I'm like, well, I agree with that. And they're, oh, right. Well, what are we arguing about then? It's like, I don't know. Probably because we're drunk and it's loud. And, but yeah, you can get, uh, I mean, I'm not advocating people try and do anything constructive when they've got alcohol in their system because it can really get in the way, get you in loops and just make things a dead end. But that just tends to be when I get a bit bolshy and argumentative is after a few beers. But that's such a good process, defining the terms, liking the person, and realizing that you want to have an engagement and an interaction where you both come out better off, right?
Mhm.
You might not have to agree. You don't have to convert the other person. You don't have to make them say, yes, you are right. I bow down before your superior intelligence. You know, it's not about that win lose. I always call it, the win lose. Some people, uh, they, 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 they have to, they can only win if someone else is, their win is based on someone else's loss. But you can have interactions where it's win-win and you both come away more informed with a new view on things. You don't have to change your view, but at least you go, oh, I actually understand your position much better now. Thank
Mhm.
you.
Although, if you're defining the goal, then one person is going to be closer to it than the other.
Mhm.
And a compromise isn't really going to serve anyone. So I say that there's really only one thing that ever argue with anyone about, which is that we are no better than anyone else.
Mm.
And as you know from the back of my book, I have only one dogma, and that is that people are inherently good. And when they behave badly, systems and stories are to blame.
Mhm.
So when they behave badly is an important part of that, because what I'm saying is people are behaving very badly in many cases. But looking at what's the core distinction that is making them behave badly, and I think that comes down to systems,
Mhm.
and that systems are facilitating and enabling the wrong things, and also stories, and the stories always come down to the superiority of one group over others.
Yeah, that's a great point. And when you say that, I'm reminded of another author. His name is he's a strange fellow. I don't know if you know him, but his name's Clint Richardson. He's put out a book called Straw Man, and he publishes it. It's not published. He's very into like the legality of language. So he's again very heavy on words, definitions, the legalese, versus just the normal everyday vernacular that we use, and how again that's in many cases inverted from what people assume it means. Um, but he's put out his this book that I've been listening to, and he talks a lot about fictions, in particular legal fictions, and how a
Mm.
corporation is just a fiction and a country is just a fiction. Really, it's a map. It's, you can see it on the map, but where's the border? In real life, you might have a border that's separating land from sea, sure, or a mountain range. That makes sense. But we operate in this reality which is just has layers and layers of fictions, and so many people buy into those as though they're real and really attach their identity and their emotions and their anger and fury and pride and love into these things that are just fictional. And so that you just what you said there reminded me of that. The stories, the systems, they're just made up. They're just man-made things that somebody's come up with and said, right, we're going to do it this way. And if you don't do it this way, we'll stick you in a cage. So you better do it this way. And that's
Yes.
that. And this is the best system you've ever had, by the way, but it's just made up. And
And
if some people can make that up, then we can just make up another way of doing it, theoretically.
and you're bringing us right back to money because money is a legal fiction.
Mm,
And what's the reality beneath the money? The reality beneath the money when I'm using money for some product made in some other country in particular is that I get to take something without giving anything of my labor back. And that is anything of my country, my class, the entire consumer
mhm.
layer, that there is no two ways. It is not trade. It is a legal fiction of entitlement and really theft.
And it just reminded me that one of the notes that I made to mention is page 23. You've got a definition of money, and you've written money, a means of organizing labor in the interests of whoever creates it. And that is such an important part of it as well. So not only is it this legal fiction, this thing that's been made up, but it's only the right to create it has been taken from us and given to a small group, maybe some families, maybe some bloodlines. I don't know exactly who it is, but it's not most people. It's a minority of people. Okay, you can print the money, you can create it, you can give it out. And these days it's just ones and zeros and ledgers, balances and credits and debits and whatnot. So they're not even printing stuff out for us anymore that we can pass around and use and hold and put in a shoebox under our floorboard and use for anonymous trading. They're even trying to get rid of that now, taking it
Right.
to that next
Yeah.
phase of total transparency, which is very scary. But um,
Yes. And
one of
let's
the
talk about that. Oh,
yeah,
to
go
talk
ahead.
about how the money is created, because right now, in terms of the US dollar, 96% is created through the mortgage. So what that means is that
That
when
much.
yeah, it's virtually all money. Um, so what that means is that when you go to buy a house, you go to the bank and you say, okay, I need this loan. They don't take that out of someone else's account. It's not like It's a Wonderful Life. They also are definitely not taking it out of their own pocket.
Nope.
They're they are making it up with this double ledger accounting, which means they say, okay, here's the debt and here's the credit, and now they balance out. The fact that they are able to do that means that they have usurped ownership of that home with nothing of their own that they put into it. And for the next 30 years, or really now 60 years, because it's all based on dual incomes.
Hmm, hmm.
So 60 years of labor is now going into serving them because they get the money back and they pass it from one hand to the other. And the other hand is them as investors, but they're not really investing anything other than your stored labor And then they are using that to take back and say, okay, well, now you work for me. And what's the job you're going to do? The job you're going to do is to make me even more money. So it is centralizing wealth, and that's really the only job in town.
And that reminds me again of another of your definitions: capitalism, page 9, concentrate concentrates ownership in fewer and fewer hands using rules written by the capitocracy we mentioned before, right? Another fantastic example, because that is what happens. And people will say, well, you know, it's better than communism. Are you a commie? You know, you must be a communist if you don't like capitalism, if you dare criticize. And it's not about that dual, if you criticize this, you must be that.
Yes.
I bet you come across this all the time, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
when I hear these debates of free market capitalism versus communism, what's rarely talked about is who controls the money, who's printing it, how are they making it, how is it circulating. That's always left out. And so you have this, like, two people discussing a system, and they're just not even acknowledging the most fundamentally important aspect of that system. Um,
Yes.
so one of the things that I learned about in your book that I'd never heard about before was Benjamin Franklin and his experiment in Pennsylvania, which is a nice little, I think, example that addresses a lot of the things we just talked about. So can you tell us a little more about this episode and what happened? Because I was reading it, I was like, "What? That happened?" And wow! Just so please
Yeah.
tell us about that.
Yes. This is the most hopeful chapter in the whole book. The
And it's
short
early on in the book as well, and it's just downhill after that.
the short eventful life of sovereign money
Yeah.
is that before the United States was a country, when it was a group of colonies, they actually had the freedom to be able to create their own currency. And the person who did this in a way that was brilliant was Benjamin Franklin. Starting from when he was a very young man, one of his first anonymous editorials was saying, here's why it actually will be beneficial to the tradesmen in our colony in Pennsylvania, because we already have the labor, we have the skilled work people, we have the resources, and the only thing that we need is the conduit to make those things come together, and we will be able to produce everything for ourselves. So that turned out to be true, is that something that other economists will say is that to say a community can't do something because they don't have the money is like saying, I can't build this house because I don't have enough inches.
Yeah. Yeah.
That money is a concept, and to not be able to do something because you don't have that concept is just wrong. So he was became the printer of the money, and and it was so successful that many years later, he was the ambassador to go back to England. And before he went to England, he visited Ireland and Scotland, I think.
Yeah.
And he came back to England and he was horrified. He said, I saw so much poverty. It doesn't have to be that way. Here's what we're doing in Pennsylvania. And every person has clothes that they've made and enough food and a roof over their head and worthwhile employment. And that could be true in Ireland and Scotland. They don't have to be living that way. And of course, the British bankers were horrified by
Of
this
course.
and wasted no time in passing the, I think it was the Currency Act. And the Currency Act said that no colony could produce its own currency, that it had to trade only in specie, which was
Mm.
metal backed, gold and silver backed currencies. And this reduced Pennsylvania to exactly where they had been before, where people were dependent and they were no longer able to take care of themselves. And that is what he says was the true cause of the American Revolution. It had nothing to do with some silly little tax on stamps or anything like that. It was really because they wanted to be able to produce their own currency.
Yeah, the figure as well that I just looked at that bit. It's around page 56 that there was a trade deficit with Britain. There was 2.86 million pounds, which in today's money is more like uh, a quick internet search tells me is 754 million pounds. Um, but this is quite mind blowing that really taking away a community's right to print their own money. That's not something you hear talked about that often. We sort of take it for granted that we have to have a central bank, and we have to have somebody else protecting us from fake money. The because if I go and print out a load of £20 notes and start giving them around, I'll get arrested, put in a prison. Central bank starts printing out
Mm.
the £20 notes, passing them around. But, everyone's happy and this is good. Business as usual. There's no problem. So it's this like usurping, as you say, of the right to do something because they want to extract, right? Because it's they're using the money system to extract wealth, extract money from people, keep them in a certain level of wealth and comfort, so they'll keep working so that this group who do this can sit back and relax and have a good life of luxury and plenty at the expense of other people. It's quite
Yes.
despicable and disgusting.
Yes.
But hearing that story gave me hope, and I was about to say I'm surprised I'd never heard of it before, but I'm not surprised. They keep these stories hidden and they make sure it's very hard to find.
Yeah.
Um,
And what Benjamin Franklin's monetary system was based on was so brilliant because it was land-backed money. So what happened is that people were able to mortgage their homes,
mhm,
and if they already owned them, they could put that exchange that for a certain amount of debt, and that debt then went into the community. But what he said is that no more than 20% of the money should be created through debt. So let's go back to the idea that 96% in the United States is created by debt. And even if that were changed over to the community, it would be a problem
mhm,
because when they create that double ledger accounting, all they're creating is the principal. But over the course of 30 years at 5.3% interest, the interest is double the amount of the principal.
mhm,
So if you don't have that money, you are always going to run out of money 15 years in. And that's why inflation is built into that system. The fact that we have this variable rate is a way to trick us because every time they lower that rate, when I bought my house 39 years ago, that rate was almost 20%. And that was actually a good thing because that keeps the cost of the house low because
mhm,
we're bidding against each other for as much debt as we can take on a monthly basis. So if you have a high interest rate, that means that the actual house is going to be a lower amount. And then if you come into money, you can pay it off sooner. But if you have the low interest rates that they are now, that means that it doesn't matter. No, that it has made the cost of the house so high that you can never be able to pay it off. So
mhm,
that's been a trick that has made more money go into the economy each time. With Benjamin Franklin, the other 80% of the money, he said, should be created through government spending. So you should decide what is it that we want to do as a community. And then you create that money, you pay the people who are doing that work, it goes into circulation, and eventually you're collecting that back in taxes. That you have to have that circulation. And that way, you can accomplish anything that you decide you want to do as a community.
Yes. Amazing. Now, I'll confess, I don't have a very good head for rates and percentages and finances and economics. It just doesn't click for me, partly because I know it's all made up and just arbitrarily put in place. But what I do appreciate is that it it's the way it like you said earlier, it's the way it is by design, and it doesn't
Mhm.
have to be this way. And
Yeah,
this, because we've allowed so much to be taken from us and done over there, whether that's in Washington and London, and then increasingly, you mentioned in the book the the list of countries that didn't have banks that were part of the BIS, and
right.
then them coming up as targets for the US to invade. And that included, I think, Libya and Iraq. And back in 2011, I think was the article you mentioned. And so there's this push now to even centralize things on a greater, grander global scale. Bank for International Settlements is mentioned in Tragedy and Hope, Carol Quigley's book, as the
Mm-hmm.
central bank of central banks, set up for that purpose. So it's quite scary to be thinking about the scale that they're trying to centralize things now, knowing that that's the problem, and knowing that the solution is going to be a lot more focused and local. And what do we want to do? And let's make our own money and trade with the people around us, and provide the things to each other that we want on a smaller scale. Um, do you think that's possible? Do you know, are there examples of places where that is happening? Can we get back to that? What are your thoughts there?
My short answer is no.
No.
I don't think anything is possible without system change.
Right.
But the good news is that I think system change is easier than we think it would be.
Okay.
That the system change that has to happen, or you can't do anything, is to have communities creating the debt of mortgages,
Hmm.
because that way the communities that the homes are our they're our collective legacy, they're our heritage, they were built by our predecessors, and that we share in that wealth. So, what my system does is it takes back, it says that no private banks can make up money, that only the community, what I call the commonwealth,
Hmm.
they're the only ones who are authorized to create the debt. And they create it in something I call carrots, because as you said, everything is a digital currency now, and in some ways that's good because that shows the paradigm easier. So in a carrot, that gets created when someone buys a house, but then you take the collective mortgages and you can generate that in the community every month to every long-term resident and native, is the way that I describe it, so that a hedge fund can't come in and buy up your property,
Hmm.
but you, as someone who was born there, as someone who's been there for a while, as someone who works in that community, you can have a 2-to-1 advantage because you can give your carrots twice or however much you want in relationship to whatever the imperial currency is. And that would enable people to live where they work and be able to work where they live.
Hmm. Yeah, that's it. That sounds so appealing. And it doesn't, it wouldn't take too many people really to establish this, because you do mention the with the carrot that it still has can be tradable into, like you say, the imperial currency, the dollar in the case of the US, right? But it's more advantageous to keep it in the community and deal with the people around you and the neighborhood, and so but you've got like that, those two levels working, um but you're rewarded for keeping it keeping it close, keeping it tight. And that just sounds so
Right.
appealing because that's
Yes.
another thing that's been taken from us. It is that
Mhm.
we've been sort of stripped of our communities and our neighborhoods, and people aren't
Yes.
so close to their neighbors, and they don't know the names of the people in their apartment block. And you're kind of
Mhm.
having to spend most of your time out of the house to pay for the house.
Yes. Yes.
Right? Which
Yes.
is just on the face of it is a con when
Yeah.
you just think
Yeah.
of it like that. But it's so normalized, people accept it. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
And if you look at my system, imagine that every person surrounding you has one purpose, which is to make your life better. Because that's how they're going to be able to get the carrots that are worth twice as much and that are also not taxed locally, so that you as a producer have twice the benefit, and as a consumer you have twice the benefit. And your purpose is exactly the same. Your purpose is to say, how can I do something that my neighbors would pay me carrots for? And the carrots that they're paying you are ones that they're getting essentially for free
Hmm.
because they're backed by the collective mortgages. So it's a system that doesn't require fear and threats in order to make it happen.
Hmm.
That I think the best way to make it happen is for people to imagine what it is that they would like to do with it. That's the series that I'm doing right now on my Substack,
Hmm.
is that I'm interviewing different people who have read my book, and I'm saying, what is it that you'd like to see happen? How would you redesign education, for instance? And let's talk about how my system could be used in order to make those things happen for you.
Wow. That's so, it sounds like such a valuable way to spend your time having these conversations, getting people thinking. Because I was going through the questions at the end of the sections, but I wanted to get the book read, so I was kind of not dwelling on them for too long. But these are big, important questions, and they're questions we should be turning our imaginations to,
Mhm.
and our attention to, because you have to imagine something before you can create it, and if you can't imagine it, you can't create it, right? So engaging that imagination and thinking, okay, how can we tweak this? How could we work? How could it work better? One of the two things actually that I was reminded of as you were given like that last answer was one of the things that money did is that you mentioned in the book is that it removed from the transaction the need to be in good standing with the people you're transacting with. Reputation goes out the window now. It doesn't matter. You could be a crook,
Mhm.
you could be a horrible psychopathic murderer, puppy killer, right? But as long as you got the cash, I'll sell you the noodles or whatever it is that you're trading. So
Yeah.
that reputation goes out. People aren't incentivized to be moral, upstanding, valuable members of the community and society anymore. And then you get that amplified in cities where the conditions are harsh and people are crammed together and you're kind of one among millions of faces. You've got that anonymity, even though you're surrounded by people. People are more like led to rip each other off, and there's more crime because you can slip away into the crowds, right? Whereas in a small community where
Mhm.
everybody knows everybody, something goes missing, they'll be like, oh, that Nick, it's that Nick, he's stolen your
Yeah.
tractor or whatever it is. He's always up to that. No
Mhm.
good, that boy. Or- and so there's like the community account there, right? But money takes that away.
Yes.
So that was
Yes.
that was finding some way to put that back in. If we could keep the convenience of having that token to exchange,
Yes.
but there was that layer of reputation, that layer
Yeah.
of kind of gift giving, because that's one of the big paradigms and misunderstandings as well, isn't it? Is that we had a gift economy in the early days in the small community groups rather than barter, which I think is this from I think this is from David Graeber's
David
work as
Graeber.
well.
Yes. 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 But let me go back before I
Yeah.
forget some of these things, because I am so happy that you are talking about the need to imagine how it could
Hmm.
be. I find that the question, well, how is this going to come about? It is the thought killer. It is, there is no point in us putting our energy into dreaming about what we'd like to see, because if it was possible, they'd never let it happen.
Right.
So that's the way that we terminate our imaginations. And people will often ask me, well, what's the answer? How do you dismantle an empire? And my answer is the same as Buckminster Fuller, is that you design a new system,
Hmm.
that when you figure out on a pragmatic level what it is that you want to see and how it will work, because this is not as easy as people think. Designing an economy where you don't have slave labor, especially when you've been turned into an entire society of consumers,
Mm.
that doesn't work. So sometimes uh, other people like Charles Eisenstein talk about the gift economy. And I think it is a very shallow and superficial kind of solution that doesn't work, because he gives examples and it's like, okay, well, you can provide this service to me, I'll provide this to you. But where do the goods come from? Where does the energy come from? That those are things that no one in our society is actually producing.
Mm.
So that's a problem that I think we need to solve. What my system does is put the producer and the worker in the driver's seat. You know, it gives them the ability, if you're going to work for someone else, rather than you going out and trying to find a job, instead it's, okay, who do I want to work for? Who do I want to gift with my labor? And what is something that I feel drawn to? And if I am producing a product, who do I think gets my product? And that doesn't mean that I don't get paid. I still get carrots, but my labor and my product is is the precious thing.
Hmm.
And that I want to see, okay, who is it that I want to make sure has this?
Yeah. It's great. It's wonderful thinking. It fills me with more hope and optimism than the typical things I usually talk about. Because I've for example, I've read on the channel the Zbigniew Brzezinski's book Between Two Ages, where he talks about how we're going into this technotronic era, which is just a sort of a zero growth, non-productive era. And he writes this book in the late 60s, early 70s, and he says this is where the Western rich nations are going. It's like the production has been offshored. It's basically all been sent to China, where the working conditions are so poor, people can be exploited, and there's really no recourse, workers' rights, unions, any of that kind of stuff. And now, what's available left in our so-called first world developed nations? It's really just tickling a keyboard all day long. There's not much other work. There's some stuff left, but it's so regulated. It's so heavily controlled by government standards and the standardization process that you've got to be licensed. You have to have your training every year. You have to follow the rules and the regs that get updated all the time, that force the older practitioners out because it always has to be updated, and the updates
Mhm.
tend to make things a little worse. Tend to make things
Yes.
more convoluted. There's more tracking software and computers put into things, and
Mhm.
so that's been done on purpose to our society so that we are so far removed now from the processes and the produce that go into the things that we consume. And it's a real
Mhm.
tragedy, isn't it? The idea that people don't even know what a cotton plant looks like, I'm sure, but they know to go
Mhm.
down to the shop and buy a t-shirt, but they wouldn't know how to repair the
Yeah.
t-shirt if they get a hole in it. So nobody's
Yeah.
repairing anything anymore either.
Mhm.
There's so much opportunity around, right? If you could become that person on your street that knows how to repair clothes, for example, like this could be one thing, couldn't it?
Mhm.
Like, hey, I'll repair your clothes for you. Instead of throwing it out, give it a new lease of life.
Mhm.
And because people aren't doing that so much anymore. Or I'll be the person who,
Mhm.
I'll take all that waste from your kitchen and I'll turn it into compost or something, and then I'll give the compost to everybody on the street, and we can all have a little veg patches. My
Mhm.
area where I live, there's most people around here have fairly decent sized gardens of different sizes because of where we are. And I walk up and down sometimes and I'm thinking, we could probably produce all the food we needed just in this little cul-de-sac that I live in if we all had some stuff growing on our in our gardens. But
Mm,
instead, there's trampolines and patios,
yeah.
beautiful trees and plants and everything. But we've got enough land between us to probably grow a decent proportion of the food we would need as a little community. And I've often thought maybe I should go knocking on doors and see if I can get anyone involved in this idea. The problem is I don't really know how to grow food, so I'd be hoping to
And
find someone who does.
and that's something that I was really involved in 20 years ago, but I have come to the conclusion that it won't work. And
Okay.
here's why. Because you can grow that food, but who's paying the mortgage? Who's paying the
Mm,
rent? That as long as you have these bankers who are ratcheting up the cost of living as high as the market can bear,
yep.
you cannot afford your own time. You can afford stuff, but the thing that is always going to be priced out of the market is your own time.
Hmm.
So I used to say that there was the unaffordable 4-H and the cheap EFG. And the unaffordable 4-H is housing, healthcare, higher education, and hope for retirement.
Okay.
And all of those keep on going up as high as the market can bear. The cheap EFG was energy, food, and goods, but that has changed.
Mm.
And they have changed it intentionally, but not the way that my plan does. What my plan was looking at is saying, well, let's start by cutting the cost of the 4-H in half and let's double the cost of food, goods, and energy because we want to be able to produce those and make a good living by doing those. And then maybe let's do that again. But because these things are so high, you would be able to afford to do those things and make a good living. Now, these are still astronomical, always out of reach. And these are now going up too.
Yeah.
Definitely in our country, because of the tariffs. Tariffs are passing on costs so that things that used to be cheap now aren't. And energy costs go without saying. Food costs, and this is all intentional. This is all being done on purpose to price us out of living, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I tend to think as well that there's probably another stage to the system that they're wanting to usher us into. And the best way to do that is to make people desperate and make people so stressed and worried and overcome with fear for the future that they'll take whatever the solution is, right? The problem reaction
Mhm.
solution model that we hear.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I totally agree that it's by
Yeah.
design, it's deliberate, and the pain that is being planned, it's probably going to be quite something and hard for most people to bear. Certainly the average, like myself, just two income family trying to service a mortgage, watching the
Yeah.
price of fuel and food go up by the week. It feels like at the moment.
Yes.
Um,
So
so
maybe, but maybe not. People say, "Oh, it's gonna have to get worse before it gets better." I think that's a trope that we've internalized, and it is not necessarily true that we are already stretched as far as we can be without breaking. Maybe that break is the thing that changes the system, and it doesn't need to be a revolution. Definitely what I'm talking about is a very soft revolution. The only people that my plan even inconveniences are a handful of bankers.
yeah.
It doesn't take anything away from anyone, including them, except for the ability to usurp more homes by creating the money. It just says you can keep all the money you have right now. You just can't create any more out of nothing. And that isn't even changing a law. It's not changing a regulation. It's changing a tiny little regulatory provision that says that banks can operate in a different way than other financial institutions.
Mhm.
All you have to do is take that exception away, and suddenly, for bankers to create money out of nothing becomes illegal. That's
Mhm.
all we have to do.
It's a very simple tweak.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yes. And it's a great point you make as well about this, or it has to get worse till it gets better way of thinking. Um, Not being true in that when you phrase it in the way you just did, it's a very small, simple tweak. It's not a big get the pitchforks and the axes and rah, go marching on Parliament kind of thing. It's like, right, we just tweak the system in this little way, and then we can just start servicing our communities and start getting people
Yes.
together and saying, what do you want? What do you
Yes.
need? And that's one thing you talk
Yes.
about in the book that I think is great is that the solutions, the situations are going to be dependent on the
Yes.
community. What are the resources? What's the landscape? What's the housing market like?
Mhm.
What needs doing there? Do new houses need building? Do old ones need repairing? Does somebody knocking down? Do schools, taking that like localized approach
Yeah.
and for people to take the matters into their own hands. Say, I live here, I've got a
Yes.
stake in this place, I like this place,
Mhm.
I want my children to grow up here, I want to be proud. That's been taken away from us as well, hasn't
Yes.
it? We've been moved
Yes.
around, shuffled around. We've been like myself, I was incentivized to go living in Southeast Asia through an English teaching program, which is what I did when I was 23 or something. But it took me out of England and it took me over to Asia. I ended up living there for 6 years. I loved every minute of it and I have no regrets. But that happened to a lot of young people. So instead of this group, this whole slice of young people, instead of us going, okay, I'm here, this is where I live, this is my community, how can I contribute and make it's like, oh, I'm going to go and live over there for however many years.
Right.
And
Yes.
so
Yes.
you're just shuffling people. Then you've got mass migration moving people in and out of
Mhm.
various countries. And so
Yes.
eh, people are just up uprooted. They don't have that anymore. So it
Mhm.
might be a case of just saying part of what you talk about in the book. We might have to just give up some of our reliance on certain things, right? Like we might have to just plant a flag and say, right, this is the place where I'm going to be. Let's work on making it as good as we can with some of these little tweaks that you mentioned.
Yes.
Um,
And I think we can have it all. If I were to say, how would the transition happen?
mhm.
I would put a 5-year moratorium on migrating,
Okay.
including things like education migration for colleges, because I think that deracinates, pulls kids up from their roots, gets them settled somewhere else, impoverishes the places that don't have that kind of college environment, and then inundates the other ones so that young people born there can no longer afford to live there.
Mm,
And I think that I've been given 2 examples of that because where I live now in Santa Cruz, California, has the highest cost of living in the country, and where I am right now, which is my Appalachian hometown, has one of the lowest cost of living. But in both cases, people are stretched to the limits. They're working 2,
mhm.
3 jobs to try, because the cost of housing always goes up to that. So I think that we could be changing that temporarily and having people settle. But I also think that travel and education are 2 of the greatest joys in life. And I would make both of those something that is affordable and lifelong. And I think that reinventing education so that we're developing curricula of things that we enjoy and that we like, and then connecting with people in other places who share that same passion, whether it is for politics and geoeconomics, or whether it's for dance or food, or whatever it is. I love the idea that we would be able to do that and have exchange programs that enable us to really get to know people in other communities, because that is the treasure, I think, that we all want to have. We want to have our home, but we also want to find other places, and we may find another place and we want to become part of that too.
Yeah, actually, I have had that sensation before when I was in, I remember it was in Thailand in a place called Chiang Mai. And I'd actually hitchhiked there with a friend of mine who taught me hitchhiking, a Russian girl. And we hitchhiked all the way from Bangkok to Chiang Mai. And I remember getting out the whole day of travel and standing by the side of the road and being picked up and dropped off by strangers. And I remember arriving there and just thinking, this feels like home. And I'd never
Mm,
been there before in my life, and I just
mhm.
remember that distinct sensation of, wow,
Yeah,
I'm home. And
yeah.
so enabling that tasting of other cultures, but the other thing as well is if you did put that 5 year kind of like, okay, let's just ease off this for 5 years, you would allow some of that cultural flavor to grow back. Because one of the problems
Mhm.
now is the internationalization of everything, the standardization of everything. You go across the world and you get out of the airport and it's a Starbucks and a McDonald's and a and
Mhm.
the
Right.
Gap, and it's the same shops everywhere you go, the same businesses, the same
Mhm.
styles, and it's all becoming one quite rapidly and alarmingly. So
Yeah,
you would allow that breathing space for those things to be sort of
right.
rediscovered and
Yeah,
to get a little stronger, to grow back a little bit before the travel started
yeah.
again, when you could actually have an experience rather than just the weather being different, the culture, the
Right.
taste, the
Yes.
dresses, the art, all that kind of stuff, the music, the dancing. So that would be
Yes.
good too.
And to make it so that you have travel relationships and also trade relationships with particular places, not an entire country, but a particular commonwealth that is has a correlation to yours, so that you mentioned earlier about how there is no there's no culpability, that there's no way of, if someone creates a scam, there's no way of being able to track that the way there would be in your own community. In my system, the carrot is like leprechaun's gold. As soon
Mhm.
as you take it out, it's not worth anything.
Mhm.
So you have to go through a process in order for that to be something that is then tradable, and the distance to which it's traded, and whether you're trading to a community that just has cheap labor, or whether you're trading to a community that you have a connection to, that makes a difference in terms of how much that carrot is worth to someone else. So that would also enable, if there is a scam, then you can say, okay, we in our commonwealth are no longer going to trade with that community until they show us that they've dealt with that perpetrator and that they've made sure this can't happen again. And if that's not just one commonwealth, but an entire coalition of commonwealths saying, okay, this is your problem. If this scam is coming from you, you need to deal with it, gives us a way that we can internationally have systems where we don't have to be risking our money. We don't have to be gambling with our savings in
Mm.
the stock market and trying to figure out how many pockets can we hide money in, so that when we retire, if one pocket gets raided, it's not going to take everything. That we shouldn't have to be doing that. So in my system, I enable retirement savings to be something that we're giving a good return, and that they are always safe because they're invested within your own community.
Wow. It's fantastic. I love hearing this. So we've got about 10 minutes left. The last thing I wanted to ask really is how has this been received? You've talked about
Mm,
it on other podcasts. You're inviting people onto your channel to discuss. You've got so many ideas and you've got such a vibrant vision. What's the response been like, and how's that changed or affected your vision?
yes. I will say that the whole COVID con, which I think is something that we share here,
Oh yeah.
that That was the best thing that ever could have happened to me
Right.
and my plan, because before that, people were very skeptical. They just saw this as pie in the sky. Oh, sounds nice, but not very practical. And all of a sudden, there was a community out there of people who knew that we'd been lied to, that it was entirely possible to lie to the entire world and
Yes.
get away with it. That the bigger the lie was, the more likely it was that people would fall for it. And that created some very tight communities. And I found that Substack was the best of those communities for being able to have people talking with each other and having long form conversations where you're not just doing some little comment thread, but instead I'm posting something and someone's posting something over here in response. So I would say that that has brought the ideas forward within a community in a way that has done my heart good. I used to say that I would go to the ends of the earth for a real conversation. And now the ends of the earth come to me. You
Right.
know, you in the UK, in Australia, in South Africa, in Latin America, I have people who are engaging with these ideas and saying, well, let's see how it could work here, because the model can work anywhere that the banks have taken over and usurped ownership of the houses. And as you had pointed out, that is a vanishingly few that are not in that. And Iran is one of the few.
Yeah, and look what's going on now, right?
Uh-huh. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for spending this time with me tonight and talking to me. We're gonna wrap things up. Where are you active? Where should people go to get the book or to hear your content or your talks that you put out? I know you put a lot of stuff out, but where's the best place and how do people find
Yes.
you?
Yes. The most central place is thirdparadigm.substack.com. And on there, I've recorded every chapter of the book. And so in one link, you can get to all of the recorded chapters. That also gives you a way of getting to the book on Amazon so that you can read it there. And again, saying that individual boycotts of Amazon, they don't really work very well. We know we need to not disempower ourselves by enabling self-published authors to be able to get the word out to
Mhm.
every country out there and do it in a way that is efficient. So those are the places, and then also Third Paradigm on YouTube and on Rumble.
Nice. This is such a wonderful book. I feel like we could sit here and talk for many more hours because there's so much in it. Historical anecdotes and stories and case studies, and then the different aspects of your vision, of your solution that you're bringing to the table. And I have to say, it's bold to do that. A lot of people, they like to sit around and point at the prison and say, "Oh, Lord, this is really bad. What's happening? And this is terrible. Not that many people will stand up and say, well, I've got an idea, and put it out there, right? Because it takes some bravery and courage to put down an answer, a solution, and say, I think this could work, and put it out there. And you've been incredibly generous to me. You've given me permission to distribute PDFs of the book to the people in my little online community. So it's not like you're trying to be a multimillionaire off the back of selling these physical copies. It's more like you're so genuinely interested in the discussions, the conversations, the ability to people, the encouraging of people to activate their imagination, to say, right, you're unhappy with the way things are. So what do we do next? We could, because there's so much time wasted in what I call conspiratainment. And I'm guilty
Mhm.
of it. I take in,
Mhm.
or not so much these days because I'm very busy with my son, but hours and hours of podcasts and talks and presentations, and I got all these books so that I could learn more. And it's all input, 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 input. But at some point, you've got to
Mm,
say, right, I'm aware enough of the problem now. What can
yeah.
I do to make it better? What can I do to actually contribute to turning this ship around? Can we do it in a lifetime? Who knows? Probably not. It's hundreds, thousands of years in the making. 3,500 years of it is explained in your book, right? But the winning, I think something Alan Watt has said is that you don't, winning isn't the only reason you get into a fight or a battle, right? There's more higher purposes and reasons. There's doing the right thing. There's an imperative to fulfill your mission, your purpose, to bring what you uniquely have to offer in terms of your creativity to the world and to the people around you. And the more people we can inspire to feel some optimism, some positivity, some
Mhm.
engagement with solutions and imagining a better situation, then the better, I think, as far as
Yeah.
I'm concerned.
Well, Nick, I really appreciate you looking at that courage because what I say to people is, okay, put your rooster in the ring. You know, don't tell me why my system won't work. Tell me why your system will work better. Because if you can show me that, I will be the best supporter ever of your system. And I think what I've designed is the perfect anarchist system because it takes the power away from the archons and it brings it down to the lowest possible level, but is really looking at the level of community and beneath that family
Mhm.
households and how we can take that back, that power. So I would not put that idea on you though that this can't happen in our lifetimes
Okay.
because it's a switch. You
Yeah.
know, whether the bankers have the ability to create the money or whether we do is a decision that happens like that. It doesn't take years.
Mhm.
It is a yes or no binary. And if we make that change, we might as well make it now rather than make it, it's not going to get any more likely that we're going to make it in 500 years. I think right now we have everything that we need and that the bribes are being taken away and we're being left with only the threats. I don't think that's going to be enough to keep us in this.
Beautiful. Well said. I think there's nothing further to add. Thank you so much again for spending this time with me. I'm glad we got it done after a year. It was definitely worth the wait. I hope everybody enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nick.